Yes. We will be recording this part. While you're muted, your video will not show up in the recordings, at least from previous experience. So it will be probably me and the screen that will be seen in the recording. Feel free to turn off your cameras as well. For the question answers, we will then turn off the recording so that doesn't make it in. All right. So before we get to the UI, I'll quickly tell the story of how ZenML can be used currently, especially when it comes to in the collaborative sense. And we're going to show what our thoughts are going forward and how, in what direction we are currently pushing the development and how the UI ties into it all. And then we'll take a quick tour of the click dummy of our UI that is currently in development. All right. So currently, this is a very rough overview of what it looks like when you are developing with ZenML on your local machine. You have your code. You have ZenML. This abstracts over all the different things that ZenML is. It's the repositories, it's the configuration. This is where you store your stack configurations. And then when you want to actually run your code on a ZenML stack, you create that information, and then you run on the actual infrastructure of your stack. So in this case, we have a local stack that our code is running on. And the configuration of the stack that describes the access to this infrastructure is found here. So now, when the ZenML user switches from their local stack to a cloud stack, this is currently how ZenML works. You would then have the description of your different stacks within either your global configuration or at repo level, maybe inside of a profile, but somewhere on your local machine, you have the description of these stacks that you're using. And based on the stack that you are choosing to run on, you will then run your code on that stack. So this is basically how ZenML works right now. But now comes the problem, or the pain that we've been seeing, is how do you share these stacks in a useful way? So if me and my colleague both want to work on the same stack, using the same ZenML configuration, we've seen users who copy paste the stack. We have the function of exporting and importing stack configurations using YAML files. One could imagine that the config directory of ZenML could be tracked in a globally accessible Git repo. So we've seen people Git tracking the configurations. We also had a minimally working version of a Zen server before that we haven't publicized a lot. But it was also possible to do it that way. But in general, there was a little bit of more friction that we would want to have in the collaborative aspect of ZenML. So collaborating on stacks, keeping that updated across the team, keeping the association between stacks and pipeline runs, all these things weren't as good as they could be. And that's the thing we're currently working on. So just to give you a quick summary, these are the things that we are currently in progress on. The metadata store will become part of ZenML, so it will move out of the stack into ZenML. We'll have a look at that in a second. You're going to be able to easily deploy and collaborate on the ZenML server. So the whole collaboration aspect is going to be highlighted in that sense. And you will be able to manage pipelines, stacks, stack components. All of these things you will not only be able to manage in the CLI, but also in a UI. So how we are imagining this is, so first, the metadata store, as we know it in the stack, instead, it's moving into ZenML. So that makes it possible to share metadata stores across stacks. It makes things much more connected and when it comes to tracking pipeline runs across different stacks and comparing these. And you'll see, you might not feel a lot this difference, but for us, this is a huge difference. And you will no longer have to worry about creating metadata stores for each one of your stacks across all the different cloud providers where you might be running your stacks. So what this means is now when you pip install ZenML, you will have the possibility to locally spin up a Zen server, which then will also offer you access to it through a UI. We'll get into that UI in a second. But the other great thing about this is now using the Zen server that we're building, you will be able to collaborate on the same Zen server with your teammates. So I could create a stack that describes this infrastructure, and my teammate could then be able to run on the exactly the same stack. And project managers and other team members can then also interact with the things that we're working on in the UI. So you could also imagine one person creating stacks and updating and maintaining stacks for the team, and then a bunch of team members working on that stack and creating pipeline runs and creating experiments, trying out different things, trying out different pipelines that can be managed in one single place. That brings us to our UI that will be the main interface for users with our Zen server. And that's the thing I'll be showing you next. All right, so this is our current click dummy of our UI. So on the homepage in the initial version, so all of these things are subject to change. We're actively developing on this. Some of these things might not be released in the first version of our UI, just as a heads up there. This is very much work in progress. So I will also be talking a little bit about the different ideas that maybe come into these and what might be there rather than what will be there. So when we look at the dashboard currently, or for the first version, we're aiming to give you some corner detail points of the whole, then the server, like all the stacks that are registered there, the amount of users, maybe the amount of pipeline runs. You'll maybe see the number of stack components that are registered, the number of pipelines that are used in your organization. So a bunch of interesting points. This might in the future then evolve into more involved dashboards that show you distributions of pipelines per stack or runs per user. Like this is going to be a place to see all the things that are happening across your team. All right, then there's going to be 3 main things that you can interact with for the beginning. So there will be pipelines, stacks, and stack components that you can manage, see, and interact with in the UI. You'll be able to see pipelines. Some of these tables entries are not relevant. They are artifacts from a previous try at UI design. So don't take the columns too seriously here, but we're going to have pipelines. And let me get back here. I clicked on the wrong thing. And underneath the pipelines, you can then see the runs for that pipeline. You can see what stack they were run on. You can see what user ran these. At some point, you might see what triggered these. That is something that we're currently thinking about, like how to also include scheduled runs and event-driven runs that can be seen here. So for a pipeline, you can see these different runs. You can also look at all the runs that are being done across the organization. And you can also then eventually filter these. So let's say I want to only see the pipelines for a given user. I'll be able to do that using the UI. So that's it for the overview over these things. But for pipelines, you'll also be able to look at the pipeline specifically. There might be something linked up wrong here. We actually also wanted to show off some designs we have here for looking at the pipeline representation. Okay, I think it's here. Yes. So this is another thing we're currently working on, so that you don't only have to go see, or you, depending on your orchestrator, you might already have some sort of visualization of your pipeline on the orchestrator side. So Vertex, Kubeflow, they offer these already. This would be a more high-level overview over the pipeline with its steps, where eventually you might also see things like experiment tracker URL. If you're using MLflow, that shows you specific things for a step or for a run within MLflow. Maybe you might see stuff like, if you have a deployer step, you might be able to click on the deployer step and see where the model is, what the URL for the model is, things like this. So these things might not be there in the beginning. These might not be there in the first iteration of our UI. But at some point, this will be the place where you can really inspect a pipeline run and find out everything about it. That's the vision for this. Okay, so that then we make our way back to the pipelines. The other thing that you might imagine, this is also not going to be there from the get-go, but you might be able to trigger pipeline runs or run pipelines directly from the UI instead of going into code. So the other thing that we're currently thinking about is our stacks. So currently, if you want to create, update stacks and stack components, this is something you do in the CLI. And the UI will offer you a different way of doing this through the forms here. And for now, you can see a stack. Let me go back to the stack and first unfold it, so you can quickly check what the components of the stack are, which stack components make up the stack. But you can also filter stacks here. This filter is not the appropriate one for stacks, but you will be able to filter stacks and then look at exactly the one that you want. Then you'll be able to see YAML configurations that you can copy paste and actually use maybe in a different ZenML server deployment, or maybe on your local machine. You can quickly try these out completely separate from the whole Zen server, and you'll be able to see the runs that are associated with this specific stack. And then our stack components. Here again, you will be able to interact with the stack components directly. You'll be able to configure them. You'll be able to potentially validate them. You'll be able to potentially create copies of them. Like, all of these things might be possible and will make interaction with ZenML first level things like stacks, stack components, and pipelines much easier, and also make it easier for people who are new to ZenML, who might not know all the CLI commands, to quickly get accustomed to what the components of ZenML are, how ZenML works, how ZenML connects these different things together, and how the things are associated with one another as well. And finally, if you talk about collaboration, you'll also need to be able to add users. So this is also something that's going to be possible from our UI. You'll be able to invite new users, and they'll then be able to be part of your organization and collaborate with you across all the pipelines, stacks, stack components, and all the other things that you need to do in the development of your ML things. All right, that brings us to the close of the quick demo of our UI. I hope you liked it. And before we go into the question and answers, maybe I'll quickly point out that we will have a launch event for this when the first version of this comes out. So if you don't want to miss out on it, come visit us here. And together with our big launch, we're also going to be running a hackathon. More information for this will be coming out soon. So feel free to join our Slack, where you'll be the first one to get this information. Hamza also already posted this in our chat for the meeting. So feel free to click on these links and be along for the ride that we're on. This is really exciting, and we're so glad to be showing you this. We're putting a lot of brain and energy into this to make it the best version that it can be. So open for your questions now. And I think we're going to stop the recording at that point. I think you're going to have to stop the recording, Dixon.